Hello and welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about a planning grant for San Andreas, the Gateway Planning Grant. On the show today, we have Peter Maurer. We also have Matt Boyer and Todd Tregenzu. Welcome, everyone, to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter, if you wouldn't mind just giving us an overview of what this project is, and so we can have just a general idea of the discussion topic tonight.
Well, this is a gateway study for the southern entrance to the community, looking at infrastructure, particularly access and circulation, as well as how it integrates with the rest of the community. This is a grant program that's sponsored by Caltrans. We're working in partnership with the Calaveras Council of Governments and Caltrans to look at how we can plan for future development for this part of the community.
And I know that San Andreas is one of those towns that has a lot of big, very important institutions like the government center, the hospital, but we tend to not have a sense of community here the way other towns in the county have. So I hope we can delve into some of those issues and how this planning grant might help us solve some of those. But before we get there, I really like to give the viewers a chance to get to know people who come on the show. And so let me come over to you. If you could just let us know who you represent and how you came to be working on this project.
So I work with REY Engineers. We're a sub-consultant to Todd and OmniMeans. Done a lot of work here in Calaveras County over the years, and our efforts are primarily related to stakeholder outreach based on those relations and kind of understanding some of the dynamics that are happening here in the county.
And when you say stakeholder outreach, what would be just a brief overview of the outreach that you'll be leading?
Sure. So we definitely want to involve the property owners within the study area boundary. We have a stakeholder advisory committee of 9 or 10 community members that have volunteered their time over the next year to provide sort of high-level steering support. But we also want to connect with business owners, building owners, community members, people that work at all the various employers that you talked about. Really make sure everybody feels like they've got an equal opportunity to help shape the future of San Andreas.
Very cool that we have someone like you on board. And then how about you? How did you get involved in this project?
So my name's Todd Tregenzu. I'm with OmniMeans Engineers and Planners. We're a transportation consulting firm. And we teamed up with Matt of REY and a couple other firms as well to put together a team that addresses the needs that the Partnership Planning Grant was seeking to solve. So we're leading that effort as the transportation planning lead, and we put together other teams to help us where they have skill sets and they're experts in their own respective areas.
And was this one of those processes where like a request for proposal went out and you competed for that and you were the selected firm?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Very cool. Have you ever worked in this area before?
We have, generally in the foothills. I haven't personally worked in Calaveras County, but my firm has. So we do have history up here, and we love it up here. We like working up here.
Yeah, I'd say this has got to be one of the prettiest places in this general state that you could be, especially this time of year.
Yeah.
And then Peter, as many folks know, you are the Calaveras County Planning Director, but maybe you could give an overview of how you came to be involved with this project.
So a year or so ago, we had a development proposal off Highway 49 near the Old Airport Road, and we realized right off the bat there was going to be some issues we needed to address with access and circulation. We wanted to make sure that any development that occurred didn't preclude future development, so we really wanted to look comprehensively at the area. That project sort of went by the wayside, just didn't work for them. And then a short while later, the CCOG, Council of Government, found out about this partnership planning grant, applied for it with the cooperation of the county. We were awarded the grant, and that resulted in this ability to sort of move in front of the development to try to plan for that future circulation needs and integration with the rest of the community, rather than have it fall in the lap of one particular developer. We can look at the whole area and see how it's going to work for everyone.
You mentioned that there was a project that ended up not working out. What was the project that?
It was just a retail store. Doesn't really matter who it was at this point.
But it just didn't work out. And
yeah.
I mean, like much of the country, we're just coming out of the recession after the housing collapse, and so any kind of large developments, especially in this rural area, tend to lag behind even the Valley and the Bay Area for sure. So we're looking specifically at the south end of San Andreas, so heading toward Angels Camp. Is that really the main area, or does this encompass the entire town?
Well, the focus is on the south end, basically from the end of the development where Angels Road comes in down to the end of the passing lane. And then on either side of the highway, and it includes everything all the way over to Pool Station Road and the undeveloped land almost to Calaveritas Road. So there's a broad area. I don't recall how many acres the study area entails, but also the circulation so the circulation planning moves sort of beyond that core study area and encompasses, all the various intersections in town, how it connects to Mountain Ranch Road, Pool Station, and, how everything will fit together.
And by circulation, we're talking about how vehicles would move back and forth, or is that also walking and bicycles?
It's definitely multimodal, and so we want to ensure that we look at public transit, cycling, pedestrian circulation, as well as vehicular circulation. And one of the biggest challenges we have is the fact that Highway 49 is Main Street, as it is in so many of our communities. And so how do you sort of meet that competing demand of getting people, from point A to point B through the town, at the same time accommodating internal circulation and access to businesses and homes and institutions? So that's really where the challenge lies here, is keeping the flow of traffic going through, at the same time providing access to the needs of the community.
I mean, that's a big challenge, because one thing that jumps to my mind is we have a passing lane right there at the end of town, which isn't really conducive to turning off and going into a business park or anything like that. In Angels Camp, we recently saw a bypass go in where you actually took that high-speed traffic and took it around for Highway 4. Now, is a bypass part of your thought process? Is that even one of the options?
I don't think a bypass really is an option. I think that alternate routes is certainly one. So if someone needs to go over to Pool Station, to some of the industrial businesses over there, they don't have to go all the way into town, up Churchill, out to Pool Station and back. You can sort of get there. But, the days of bypass, those are over. Caltrans is not funding those anymore, so that's unlikely to happen.
No more Now, is that just a cost issue, or where does that come in?
Primarily just funding.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I think it's a change in focus by Caltrans as well.
Yeah, a little bit of an underlying policy issue there. And so one of the bypasses were one way to solve sort of the communities as main streets issues, because it was an opportunity for Caltrans to say we have a ton of driveways and intersections on the existing road. The bypass would give us a road to accommodate the through traffic, would relinquish the local road. So now part of this study is to answer the question, we're back to a main street that's a state highway with all the driveways, all of the points of access, but in order to achieve economic development goals and community growth goals, we have to add new driveways and new points of access. Without a bypass coming in the future, how do we massage what we currently have so that it's a win-win for the locals and for Caltrans?
Well, I know we're just beginning this, but what would be some possible solutions to those problems?
Well, that's what we're trying to discover through this
okay,
study.
So this is everything's on the table right now. There isn't any one leaning one way or the other right now. Okay. Well, let me ask you this. One of the things that I've noticed, I grew up in San Andreas, so I spent a lot of time here, is that people tend to come into San Andreas at about 50, 45 miles an hour. They don't slow down much when they go through, and then bam, they're all the way through. And that creates, if I'm trying to get out of the grocery store or a side street onto the main highway, it kind of makes me a little bit scared to get on there. I might get hit. There's also that suicide lane going all the way through. Sometimes I'm coming out of one business and someone's coming out of another, and we almost have a head-on collision in the middle. And this whole speed factor. So will reducing speed or trying to change that modus operandi be part of the study?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we that's one of the main concerns we hear from the community. We've done some initial outreach. We're like Peter said, we're at the very beginning of this process, and we're still gathering everyone's thoughts. And so we're having a public workshop coming up. We're looking forward to getting more information there from community priorities. But safety and speed is definitely a major concern, not only for the community, but for Caltrans as well. And so looking at ways to reduce traffic speed without necessarily a bunch of loud signs and things saying, "Hey, slow down." Those are things we're looking at, and how to. Part of that is the grade coming down 49 to Mountain Ranch heading north, and as we look at the land use on both sides of the highway south of Mountain Ranch, creating a sense of place and of arrival before you hit that downward grade, we think will potentially go a long way towards signaling that, hey, you're entering a community, slow down, we're not on the highway anymore. So you're not approaching Mountain Ranch at 60 miles an hour.
That actually makes a lot of sense, because you really don't feel like you're in a town until you're at about Mountain Ranch Road, and you're already down that big hill, and you still have your 55 speed, if you haven't paid attention to the signs.
Yeah.
And the Welcome to San Andreas sign is really right up the hill from there, too, kind of tucked on that corner. So what would be, and I know it's early, but what would be a way to create that I've entered town farther south? How would you go about doing that, perhaps?
Well,
Good
that's
question.
why we're really partnering with the landowners as well. And there are some areas that are designated for future commercial, residential growth out there. How does that all develop? We're working with Caltrans this time around, which is somewhat new to the process. There's been some shifts in philosophy over at Caltrans, and so they're interested in working with us to find a way to allow growth along the corridor. There's been some challenges in the past getting approvals for development on the corridor because of conflicts with Caltrans policy. And a lot of that is getting not necessarily brushed aside, but the conversation has changed. And so we're really looking at ways to help development occur in a structured fashion. So we know we kind of have a plan for how this is all going to work from a circulation perspective, from other infrastructure needs, and so we're hoping that the plan kind of serves as a roadmap, a blueprint for development down there. And so we can't ourselves build a town on the south end, new buildings and businesses, but we can try to facilitate that.
So just like with the general plan, Peter, once you have that passed and updated by the board and in place, that allows developers to say, okay, I know what the plan is and I can build within its guidelines, and that can move things forward. Once this plan is in place, if someone did want to come in, they wouldn't have to go through as much legwork to put the foundation down of what would or wouldn't be okay.
Exactly. I think that's the whole point of the planning at this level is to let's look at what the needs are. So as individual projects come forward, we can say, well, here's the incremental improvements that we need for your project that fits into the overall puzzle. And so you can put pieces together, and at some point in time, there's a economy of scale that says, okay, now we can afford to make these connections, and nothing has been put in the way that sort of blocks that future connection, and that people will developers will incrementally pay for their share of the costs of making that all work for them as well as for the rest of the community.
So expand on that. What would be a funding mechanism that wouldn't, I think someone mentioned putting all of it on one developer, but instead spreading the cost around? Are there some ideas about that?
Well, that's something we'll be investigating as well, but there are different funding mechanisms. We could have a benefit basin where everything within a region pays a certain amount. There could be just sort of incremental costs. Say, okay, if you pay for this much, this is your fair share of these overall improvements. There could be grant funding once there's a plan in place that sort of stimulates the ability to acquire additional grants from Caltrans or other sources that might help pay some of the other infrastructure costs.
Okay. And you had mentioned just a minute ago that the philosophy of Caltrans has changed to some extent. But I also understand that Caltrans has these rules in place for a reason. Many of these rules, they may seem strict, but it's to try to protect what they're trying to accomplish with their road. So what are some things that you've noticed are changing, and why do you think those changes are taking place?
Well, so one clear example is the publication of a new guide they've put out called Main Street California. And so that is dealing with communities exactly like San Andreas, where the highway is the main street, is dual function. And so Caltrans has really made an effort, I believe, to come alongside communities like San Andreas and help work out, a lot of times the community priorities may focus a lot on pedestrian crossings and bike lanes and, transit access and things that would otherwise potentially slow down through traffic. And so they may have butted heads with Caltrans policies of the past, which were really focused on throughput only, and how fast are people getting through with how much delay and with how many collisions. And so those metrics are now still there, but there are other metrics that are important. And Caltrans now has performance metrics that deal with multimodal access, and they want to encourage walking and biking because it also reduces the demand for vehicular use if you have a lot of people walking around town instead of driving, one block down the street because it's unsafe to walk. So there's a mutual. I think the philosophy change has occurred from a state level because there's now a sense that there's mutual interest in kind of focusing on these community priorities.
That makes a lot of sense. And one thing that kind of fascinates me is, as you said, the main street and the thoroughfare being the same. Sometimes it works and there's a thriving town, and other times, sometimes it's like the freeway with not really much going on either side. It seems like San Andreas is more the latter, but you see places like Sonora. I mean, I'm not going to say it's super thriving, but it's pretty thriving. You have quite a few businesses, you have a lot of walking traffic, and people really can't go fast because you'd probably kill someone or hit a car.
Right.
And I don't know if that's just because the street is so narrow. Peter, do you know any history about, was San Andreas a very narrow highway? It seems like at one point it must have been expanded and
yes,
really
it was,
blown out.
Obviously I wasn't here then, or I was, a young kid growing up when it happened. But the old Highway 49, which is called Gold Strike Road, now came in Main Street, made a 90-degree turn onto St. Charles, and continued out Angels Road. Sometime, I think in the late 50s, early 60s, Caltrans widened the highway, took out, a row of old historic buildings, which is really unfortunate if you look, back in 2020 hindsight. But and so widened the road, allowed the through traffic, and I think that between that, some of the other economic factors that affected the community has really created a challenge for San Andreas. And how do we make San Andreas work like other communities that have been successful, even though the highway goes through the middle of town? There's a lot of different dynamics that are at play. Economics, just the style of the housing, the layout of the community itself. Those that are more compact tend to have a little more play. People can park one spot and walk around the community, go to different shops and restaurants. Where we're spread out along the highway, it makes that more challenging for us. So there's a lot of different things at play here.
But would you say that these networks of roads and how they're designed, is that one of the more significant factors on what gives a community life and gives it that sense of community versus maybe losing that? Is that one of the major factors?
I think it's the primary factor. It's probably not the only factor, but it's certainly one.
Okay.
The attractiveness of the community, the types of buildings are there. What businesses are there that would cause people to stop. We have a challenge here is that a lot of people will go to other communities to do their primary shopping. They'll go to Jackson, or they'll go to the Valley. And so that's a challenge for us. How do we attract, how do we keep businesses here? How do we keep people shopping in the community so that, people will then walk around. And fortunately, we do have some fairly large employers. We've got the hospital, state agencies, the county, high school. So people are here. It's just a matter of, how do we make it all fit together and work?
No, absolutely. Well, I'm so glad that this is happening, as someone who grew up here, and my family still lives in San Andreas. I had heard a lot of community members talking about this type of thing for so long, and at one point, roundabouts were being discussed, and other points, more crosswalks or more sidewalks and things of that nature. So is this kind of the culmination of some other efforts that maybe it started and stopped?
I think that we'll try to utilize those past studies. There was the mobility study that was done several years ago that had a lot of good things in it. Unfortunately, it didn't have full participation of Caltrans. It just sort of stopped partway through the process. There's the community planning effort that we've done through the general plan process that also is not quite completed yet. That we hope to get incorporated in the general plan at some point. All those things have some great ideas, and what we'd like to do is take from those and integrate that into with what we're doing. Again, focusing on the south end of town because that's where this grant was, what we applied for the grant for. But it all has to play together. It has to integrate.
Absolutely.
And so there's some great ideas from some of those older plans that we don't want to throw out those good ideas. So definitely utilize them.
I should have gone over this earlier, but what was the amount of the grant that we're working with, the dollar amount?
I don't remember.
Okay. Sorry. I think I talked to someone at COG somewhere around 180,000. Is that close?
That sounds about right.
Okay, so right in there. And then when did the work start?
We started right around the beginning of the year. I think the contract was awarded late last year, and we had some kickoff meetings, but really with the holidays, we got started this year.
Okay, so we can go in for a few months here, and then when is the completion expected for the study?
Next June, 2017, but there's going to be big chunks of the study prepared before that. So, our public workshop coming up May 11th, we want everyone to come out, and that's really going to help feed into wrapping up our existing and background conditions report. That'll be kind of a big milestone. Then we'll look at different alternatives, right? Different alternative land use ideas and some ideas for the Southern Gateway, what the different connections could be, whether they be connecting to Pool Station, Calaveritas, what can be done out there. We'll have more ideas to flesh out. And so that alternatives analysis will form another major milestone. And then the third milestone will be the selection of the preferred alternative. And between all of these, there's going to be public involvement, both on an advisory level and also as a public workshop level.
And Matt, I was hoping you could touch on that a little bit, because I imagine you're kind of facilitating the public involvement. So May 11th, I heard, was when the next meeting's coming up. What time and location for that meeting?
So we're at Town Hall here in San Andreas. 5:30 is sort of the open house convening. The formal meeting with a presentation will happen at 6 o'clock, and these folks will be hanging around as long as people want to give additional thoughts and perspectives even after the formal meeting wraps up.
So will there be an opportunity for people to give kind of public comment at that meeting orally?
Absolutely, and we would anticipate a much more interactive dialogue. We're still in these early days of listening and data gathering. So in order for us to be successful at the end, we really have to make sure we've really listened with really large ears to the whole array of perspectives in the community, really understand where people participated in the past planning efforts that Peter alluded to. What did people like, not like? Try to not spend our energy retreading some ground. And the big challenge, I think, for this team is we have some really tremendous technical experts at the COG and at the county and then on the consultant team. But as you alluded to, each community is so unique and different that we can bring the toolkit, and then it's a matter of suggesting ideas that reflect the values and the input that the community wants.
So these meetings are a big part of that. And then also there's an advisory committee. Is that what it's called?
Stakeholder Advisory Committee.
Stakeholder Advisory. Okay, and tell me more about that. How was that formed, and how many people are on that?
So we have 9 or 10 people that applied to be on that committee. There was an application process that the COG released, noticed on Pine Tree and a couple of other venues. And then we made some, sort of walk the streets and talk to people that have been active in some of the past planning efforts, made some phone calls to people that we knew were sort of interested and represented a really broad array of perspectives. And so we were fortunate enough to get those 9 or 10 people that were willing to give of their time for the next 15 months or so. And they had their first meeting here a couple weeks ago.
And how often will they be meeting throughout the process?
I would say generally we think they're going to meet quarterly, and generally around the major milestones that Todd talked about. We're sort of in that existing conditions. We'll develop some alternatives. We'll vet those alternatives, have a draft report. So each one of those milestones will have an opportunity for sort of focused stakeholder input. We want to be respectful of their time and give them some meaningful opportunities for input.
So the public involvement is a high priority throughout this whole process through the advisory group and these meetings, really being transparent and open with the public and giving opportunity. But the question is, just because you have the ability to participate doesn't mean that you do.
Right.
And I see that over and over again with committees and things. Sometimes you have this whole planning effort and you have a public meeting and you only have 3 people there, and they're the people who attend every Board of Supervisors meeting and Planning Commission meeting, and it's the same people. So what have you found so far in terms of community interest in this?
Well, I think there's tremendous community interest in San Andreas just based on the past work. And obviously, we're just now in the process of noticing the May 11th meeting. But we know through through COG, through the local utility district, through the county, who those mailing lists are, both electronic and physical. And we expect to have pretty large turnout.
Great. Yeah,
I would have to agree with Matt on that. San Andreas has a very active community when it comes to planning activities, and I think it's very admirable that despite all the starts and stops on planning efforts, they're still interested. We had a really good turnout on a meeting we had of just the property owners that are involved in the area. The stakeholder meeting was well attended, and I think we'll have really good attendance.
Great.
And interest in the project.
So we only have a few minutes left here, but once this study is complete, what happens next?
That becomes sort of a building block for future development, incorporation into other grant applications. It may be adopted formally by the county. It certainly would be something that we can utilize as development progresses. Hopefully it's not something that just sits on a shelf, but we actually can use it so that as the community evolves, we can say, well, here's how we want it to go. Here's how the community worked to develop this plan. And your project fits in perfectly with this, so we can make a few minor tweaks and it's good to go. So it would really be beneficial for future development to streamline the process of getting them through the process. With Caltrans buy-in, there won't be that sort of counterproductive debate, discussion of traffic studies. We know what we want. We're all in agreement. It's fairly simple to say, well, here's the requirements that we have. Caltrans agrees with this. The county agrees with this. We know it'll work, and hopefully get some activity in that area of the county.
All right. And the best way for people to get involved or find out information about this process would be, where would they go? Who would they call?
So they can certainly call the COG office, and that's the 209-754-2094. We have the information I think will be available through this broadcast as far as how to get a hold of the COG via electronic email. We have a website that we've set up. I don't know if we're ready to broadcast.
sanandreas.sr49.org. And we'll be publishing information as it becomes available and meeting dates as well. And by the time anybody goes there, I'm sure we'll have some meeting dates posted.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, it sounds like everything is moving in a very positive direction, and I'm really glad that we got this grant and that we can put a framework in place for this county's future success. So thank you all for the hard work that you're doing on this project.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.
All right, and if anyone's interested, please go to the website and then get in touch with the COG and make your voice heard. Thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and I hope you join me next time.